The first time I met Owen was right after I face-planted on the playground turf, and he reached out his hand with a smile that, looking back, felt too perfect. This happened to me in 5th grade, back in 2012, when I was living in New York City. Even now, more than a decade later, it's hard to talk about. But I feel like people, especially parents, need to hear this. Just in case they're a little too quick to trust whoever their kid starts calling a friend. It was late September. Cool air, breezy skies, the kind of day that made after-school soccer feel like heaven. My routine was always the same, class till 3, then soccer until my mom called me home. That day, I was chasing the ball with everything I had when my foot caught awkwardly in the turf. I hit the ground hard. Before I could even get up, this boy I didn't recognize knelt beside me and offered his hand. "Hey, you good?" he asked with a small smile. "I'm Owen," said. He was new to the neighborhood. His first week at our school. There was something calm about him, quiet, but easy to talk to. We clicked right away. In the days that followed, we hung out more and more, recess, team games, even just chatting between classes. He lived just a few blocks away, which made it super easy to hang out. My parents met him once or twice during pickup, and they seemed fine with it. Friendly kid nearby, no red flags. About 2 weeks later, on a Saturday morning, my parents and I drove out to Bear Mountain for a hike. It was something we did once in a while, and we rarely saw anyone we knew out there. So it felt weird when, halfway up the trail, we ran into Owen and his dad. His dad, Patrick, was tall, well-spoken, easygoing. The kind of guy who just puts people at ease. He and my parents talked for a bit, and somewhere in the middle of that conversation, he brought up the idea of me sleeping over at their place sometime soon. My mom was hesitant at first. Her gut must have twitched, but Patrick was reassuring, even warm about it. Promised close supervision, and said Owen had been so excited to finally have a good friend. My parents eventually gave in. The next Friday night, I walked over to Owen's house for the sleepover. From the outside, it looked normal. Cozy even. But something about the air inside made my skin crawl, not fear, exactly. More like that quiet discomfort you try to brush off. At first, it was fine. Pizza, video games, talking about soccer and favorite players. Around 10 p.m., Owen's dad poked his head in and gently told us it was bedtime. We headed up to Owen's room and settled in. I don't know what woke me up later that night. Maybe it was the voices. Or maybe it was something else, something I felt before I even heard a sound. From downstairs came the low murmur of several people talking, quick, sharp, and muffled like they didn't want to be overheard. I nudged Owen awake and whispered, "Do you hear that?" Still half asleep, he shrugged it off. "Probably my dad and some guests." But then, Owen's dad called up, his voice suddenly sharp and commanding. "Owen, come down." Now. Owen frowned, got up, and left the room without another word. I was alone. Something about the silence that followed made my skin crawl. Without thinking, I got up and quietly locked the bedroom door. Just in case. Then the yelling started. Louder voices. Angry. Urgent. Heavy footsteps pounded up the stairs, slow and deliberate. Then came a knock at the bedroom door, hard. Too hard. "Open the door," Owen's voice said. Calm. Too calm. He said everything was fine. But I could still hear the shouting behind him. I stayed silent. Pretended I was asleep. Then another voice, not Owen's. Deeper. Rougher. "Open this door. Now." My fingers fumbled across the bedsheets for my phone. I managed a broken text to my parents, "I'm scared. Lock doors. Come quick." Before I could type more, the pounding returned. This time it was violent, so hard it rattled the whole room. I panicked. Ducked into the closet and buried myself under Owen's clothes, trying not to breathe. Then I heard it. Wood splintering. The bedroom door gave way. Someone stormed in. I could hear the harsh buzz of a flashlight sweeping across the walls. Then the closet door flung open. A man, massive, unfamiliar, reached in and grabbed me. I kicked, thrashed, screamed. But he dragged me effortlessly down the stairs. My feet barely touched the ground. Outside, a black van idled in the driveway. Its engine was running. And there, beside it, stood Owen. Silent. Motionless. Not even looking at me. That's when it hit me. This wasn't random. They were kidnapping me. But just as the man dragged me across the front steps, headlights flared. My dad's car. His sedan screeched into the driveway. I always thought the scariest story I'd ever tell would be about the time I was almost kidnapped. But that was before I learned what my parents did before I was even born. Relief flooded through me when I saw my dad's car pull into the driveway, headlights slicing through the night. But that relief was crushed the second I felt cold steel pressed into my ribs. The man dragging me toward the van had pulled a gun. My dad jumped out, holding his own firearm, his legally registered safety gun, and shouted for them to let me go. His voice cracked from panic. The man holding me didn't flinch. He warned my dad to drop the weapon or he'd teach me a lesson. It was the most terrifying standoff I've ever witnessed, and I was in the middle of it. Then fate intervened. Out of nowhere, a patrol car cruised by. The officers must have sensed the tension instantly, because they slammed the brakes, leapt out, and shouted commands. Guns drawn. Everything happened in a blur. Within seconds, both men were on the ground, pinned, cuffed, and screaming. Owen's dad, Patrick, was shoved into the back of the police car, still protesting, acting like it was all some mistake. But it wasn't. Not even close. The days that followed were surreal. Detectives visited our house almost daily. My parents barely slept. I didn't either. Not because I couldn't, because I didn't want to. Weeks later, the lead detective finally sat us down. What he told us still echoes in my mind. Patrick had planned to sell me, to the man with the gun, for $10,000. He had a long history. Turned out he'd fled Boston months earlier, where he was wanted for similar crimes involving child trafficking. The guy had been hiding in plain sight. Right next to us. Smiling. Friendly. Inviting. And Owen? He wasn't innocent. The detective said he'd been involved before. He'd helped. Which means every moment I spent with him, playing soccer, hanging out at recess, he was setting me up. That's the part that sticks with me the most. He was never really my friend. He was part of it all along. Owen never came back to school. His family vanished. My parents were devastated, blaming themselves for trusting a stranger. But how could they have known? The truth is, you never really know anyone, not completely. And just when I thought I had moved on, I found something that made everything worse. Let me switch gears for a second. If this is your first time here, thanks for checking out the channel. If you're into real horror stories, especially the ones that sound too messed up to be made up, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. I post every week, and trust me, it only gets darker from here. Now, let's talk about something more recent. My name's Julian. I live with my parents, let's call them Leonard and Helen, in Texas. I'm an only child. And last week was my 18th birthday. I didn't expect much. It landed on a weekend, so no college classes. I got up, made myself some coffee and breakfast, and figured my friends or roommates might throw me a little surprise later. No big deal. Then I checked my phone. My parents had sent me a message in our group chat. It was simple. Happy birthday. Along with 3 video files. My mom wrote something like, just a few memories for you now that you're officially an adult. At first, it was sweet. The first video was my 3rd birthday party, me blowing out candles while a bunch of little kids screamed and laughed behind me. The second one showed me learning how to ride a bike. I looked so happy, pedaling around the block, helmet too big for my head. That bike was everything to me back then. Then I opened the 3rd file. That's when everything shifted. The video didn't start with me. It didn't even look like something from our family camera. It was shaky, like it had been filmed in secret. From behind a wooden fence, the camera zoomed in on a man, a woman, and a little kid in their backyard, having a barbecue. Singing. Laughing. Whoever was filming stayed low, crouched behind the fence. At the 5-minute mark, a voice came from behind the camera. A woman's voice. "Have you got them, Leonard?" Then a man answered. "Oh yeah, I have, honey." I froze. That voice, it sounded just like my mom. And the man, he sounded exactly like my dad. I paused the video. My chest tightened. My palms were sweating. No. I had to be wrong. I resumed the video. The man behind the camera turned it around briefly, and there was no mistaking it. It was them. My parents. Younger. Maybe 20 years ago. Smiling. But not like the smiles in those other tapes. My mom had a devilish grin, a look that didn't belong on the face of the woman who raised me. "Are you ready?" she asked. "Of course I am," my dad replied. They moved around the fence. My mom reached into her pocket and pulled out something shiny. I couldn't tell what it was, but it caught the light like metal. They crept closer. The woman in the yard, still laughing, turned her head. Then, suddenly, she collapsed. Just dropped. Like a puppet with its strings cut. The man with her spun around in shock, and then... I always believed my name was just a name. A label my loving parents gave me. But the night I turned 18, I found out it was something else entirely. Something stolen. The woman collapsed like her strings had been cut, just dropped. The man next to her stood frozen, his face still full of life for a split second, and then it drained of color. Fear, pure, gut-wrenching fear, washed over him, and he bolted. Sprinting from the yard, disappearing beyond the frame. I didn't breathe. My hands were clamped over my mouth as I stared at the screen. That's when I saw my father, Leonard, bend down and take the baby from the woman's lifeless arms. The child cried out, confused, desperate, calling for its mother. My mom, Helen, walked over with eerie calm. She pulled out a tissue, shoved it into the baby's mouth, and hissed, "Shut up." I felt sick. Nauseated in a way that reached into my bones. Then the camera cut. They were in a different house, one I recognized. It was our old home, the one we lived in before moving to Texas. A place I hadn't thought about in years, suddenly drenched in new meaning. My mom approached my dad with a folder in her hands. "Let's prepare the papers," she said, voice steady, almost excited. Then came the words that broke me. "I think we should name him Julian." Leonard nodded. "I like that name. I'm sure he'll be great." The screen went black. I downloaded the video before I could even think about what I was doing. Then I sat there. Still. Cold. Barely blinking. For 10 full minutes I didn't move. My whole life, my entire existence, was suddenly a question mark. When I reopened our group chat, the third video was gone. Deleted. But a message from my mom popped up. "Did you see the third video?" I lied. "No. I didn't." She replied quickly. "Okay. I sent that one by accident." I sent a thumbs up emoji. That was it. End of conversation. But it wasn't the end of anything. Not even close. It's April now. I'm weeks away from finishing my first year of college. And when it's done, I'm leaving. Somewhere far. Somewhere no one knows me. There I'll report them. Anonymously. Leonard and Helen, my so-called parents, will be arrested. For kidnapping. Abduction. False imprisonment. Possibly murder. Because they didn't just raise me. They stole me. And the thought of it, the idea that my entire life was built on blood and lies, has driven me to some dark places. Really dark. I've thought about ending it all. But I won't. I'll survive this. Not for me, but for the truth. For that baby crying in the video. For the life that should have been mine. And when I'm finally safe, when they're locked away for good, I'll tell the world everything. But for now, I'm still watching. Still waiting. Still pretending. You ever get so used to being tired, you stop noticing the warning signs? Like when things start moving on their own, or your kid starts whispering about a man in the closet? Being a single mother isn't easy. Between raising my 3-year-old daughter, Lily, and working graveyard shifts at a greasy 24-hour diner, I was running on fumes most days. So yeah, I forgot things. I left milk out. I forgot to lock the door. Sometimes I couldn't remember if I'd even eaten that day. We lived in a modest 2-bedroom house in a quiet neighborhood called Hawthorne Heights. Not fancy, but it had charm: creaky floors, paint peeling in the corners, old doors that never quite closed right. But I never felt unsafe. Not really. Until October. It started small. One night after a long shift, I noticed one of the kitchen chairs was pulled away from the table. Just slightly. Like someone had sat down, then stood up quickly. I could have sworn I pushed it in before leaving. Another day, the TV remote vanished for hours. I found it later, sitting on the bathroom sink. Lily was playful, sure, but she was still tiny. Barely tall enough to reach that counter. Still, I brushed it all off. That's what tired people do. We rationalize. But then Lily said something that made my blood run cold. I was tucking her in, humming quietly, when she looked up at me and whispered, "Mommy, the man in the closet scares me." I paused, then gave her the usual soft reassurance. Opened the closet. Showed her it was empty. She smiled weakly and nodded off. But those words stuck in my head like a splinter. Over the next few days she clung to me more. Kept glancing nervously at the closet. Always quiet. Always watching. Still, I told myself, kids say weird stuff. But on October 22nd, something shifted. That morning, I found muddy footprints near the back door. Big ones. Too big for Lily's shoes. My breath caught. But again, excuses. Maybe I tracked them in. Maybe I'd gone out to take the trash and forgot. Maybe. Then came October 25th. It was a Thursday. Quiet night at the diner. My manager let me leave early, rare but welcome. I drove home under a heavy sky. Moon hidden. Shadows everywhere. Something felt wrong. When I rushed into my daughter's room and saw her staring at the closet door, I thought it was just fear. I didn't know she was looking directly into the eyes of a man who had been living above us for weeks. Pulling into the driveway, I felt my chest tighten. My sister's car was missing. That might not seem like much, but she never left Lily alone. Not once. Something felt off. I parked fast, my hands shaking slightly as I unlocked the front door. "Fiona?" I called out gently, just in case Lily was asleep. No answer. Just the stillness of a house that should have had someone inside. Then, a faint sound upstairs. A rustling barely audible. Relieved, I figured Lily was awake. I crept up the staircase quietly, the carpet absorbing each step like I was moving through a dream. Her door was open. And that's when my heart sank. Lily was sitting upright in bed, wide-eyed, lips pressed into a tight line. She wasn't looking at me. She was staring directly at the closet door. Her gaze was fixed and trembling with fear. I looked over. The door was cracked open, gently rocking back and forth. Not fast, just enough to make the air feel colder somehow. Like it was breathing. Something screamed inside me. "Get her out. Now." I snatched her up into my arms and backed out of the room. She clung to me without a word, her tiny fingers digging into my shoulders. Then, from above, the sound I'd been dreading. A creak. Almost delicate. But undeniably coming from the attic. In 3 years living in that house, I'd opened the attic maybe once. It was a cramped, dusty crawlspace I never thought about. Until now. My fingers fumbled with the phone. I dialed 911 as fast as I could, my voice cracking as I explained what was happening. Within minutes, blue and red lights painted the street. 2 officers rushed in. One stayed with me and Lily while the other went upstairs, gun drawn. We sat frozen in the living room. Lily buried her face in my sweater. Then, yelling. A loud thud. Running above us. The second officer sprinted up the stairs. More yelling. A scuffle. I held Lily tighter. My ears rang with every noise, waiting for something, anything, to break the nightmare. Finally, they came back down. Both officers. And between them, handcuffed, was a man. Thin. Filthy. Hollow-eyed. And familiar. I'd seen him around town. At the gas station. At the grocery store. A nobody, I'd thought. Just some random guy. He'd been living in our attic for weeks. Slipping in through a loose vent in the back of the house. Moving around while we were gone. Watching. Waiting. Later, the police showed me photos of what he'd left behind. Wrappers, blankets, clothes, and a hole. A tiny hole drilled through the attic floor. Right above Lily's closet. He'd had a perfect view of her. Every night. She wasn't imagining the man in the closet. He was real. We moved out days later. I didn't even pack everything. Even now, in a new apartment miles away, in a brighter neighborhood with 3 locks on every door, Lily still whispers sometimes. "Mommy, is the man still in the closet?" And I still check. Every night. Every room. Because the truth is, you never know how long someone's been watching. There's something about a campfire that makes you feel safe, until the trees start whispering back. I was 14 the summer we went camping in Harriman State Park. It was supposed to be a peaceful getaway, just me, my family, and my best friend Ethan. My parents had always loved the outdoors, and this trip was their way of showing us the wild beauty of the Hudson Valley. It was early July. The drive from our New Jersey suburb to the park only took a couple of hours, but once we were surrounded by those dense woods and winding trails, it felt like we were in a different world. The park was massive, miles of deep forests, glistening lakes, and secluded paths. The air smelled like pine and moss. The sun filtered down through towering oaks and maples, giving everything that quiet, enchanted glow. Ethan and I were buzzing with energy. We'd been planning this trip for weeks, circling trail maps, prepping ghost stories, hyping ourselves up for night hikes and campfire dares. Our tent was set up near Lake Tirate, one of the quieter areas. My parents parked beside a few other families, the campground alive with laughter, folding chairs, and sizzling hot dogs. We spent the first afternoon swimming in the lake, then drying off beside the fire with marshmallows and root beer. It was perfect. Almost too perfect. But that night, something watched us from the trees. The first night it was just stories. The second night we met her. And by the third, we were running from something that didn't feel entirely human anymore. That first night under the stars, Ethan and I tried to spook each other with ghost stories we picked up at school, urban legends, haunted cabins, cursed trails. We laughed harder than we screamed, but something about the darkness made every word feel heavier. The trees, silent and tall, always seemed to be listening. The next evening, after hiking the Pine Meadow Trail with my family, Ethan and I decided to take what we proudly called the walk. We'd done it the previous summer, a nighttime stroll into the woods with just our flashlights and guts. No adults. No rules. Just 2 teenagers tempting fate under a sky full of stars. We left the path after a while, following familiar deer trails, cracking jokes about our own made-up monsters. But as the forest grew darker, the fun started to dissolve. At first, it was just normal forest noise. The rhythmic chirp of crickets. The occasional owl. Then we heard a new sound, low, mumbling, almost lost in the wind. Barely there. Just enough to set your nerves twitching. We stopped, lights sweeping the underbrush. Nothing. Just trees and tangled shadows. Probably another camper, I muttered. But I didn't believe it. The whispering didn't stop, it grew clearer. More insistent. My grip on the flashlight tightened. Then movement. A woman crawled out of the woods. She was on all fours, dragging herself across the trail like she'd forgotten how to walk. Her clothes were dark, soaked in something, maybe mud. Her hair was matted to her face, and she spoke in a frantic stream of nonsense. We froze. She paused, then slowly turned toward us. Her eyes, they weren't just tired. They were empty. We stepped closer anyway. Asked if she was okay. She stood up shakily and said something about her campsite, her friends, words slurring together like she wasn't really aware we were there. We helped her back to the tents near the lake, where her stuff was strewn across the ground like someone had left in a panic. No one else was around. We gave her water. Watched her lie down. Then we ran. The next morning, she was sitting near a picnic table, staring blankly at the water. We waved. Nothing. When my dad asked if everything was okay, we lied. Said she was probably just drunk. It was easier than trying to explain the unease gnawing at our insides. That night, my dad offered to drive into Sloatsburg for supplies. Ethan and I stayed behind, still chasing that itch to understand what we'd seen. We didn't go far. Just enough to convince ourselves we were braver than we felt. The woods seemed quieter. Normal again. Until we saw her. Standing beside a tree. Alone. She was talking, but not to us. Not into a phone either. There was no screen glow, no earbuds. Just her, whispering to the trees like they were whispering back. When she saw us, she stopped mid-sentence. Her eyes widened. Her whole body went still. Ethan yanked at my arm. We backed away, slow and silent, like any sudden move might trigger something we couldn't take back. That night, we tried to sleep. But sometime around midnight the sounds returned. Rustling. Right outside our tent. At first, I told myself it was an animal. A raccoon. Maybe a deer. But then I thought of her. Alone. Whispering. Watching. I lifted the flap. There was nothing there. Just stillness. Silence. But the kind that presses in too close. The kind that tells you someone just left. At dawn we packed up. Fast. We told our parents we wanted to leave. Now. We didn't give details, but they saw it on our faces. The fear was real. They didn't argue. They packed up too. As we pulled out of Harriman State Park, I watched the tree line grow smaller in the rearview mirror. But for a moment, I thought I saw her. Standing just behind the trees. Still watching. Still whispering. She was just a shadow by the ranger's station, but the way she stared through us, it felt like she hadn't stopped watching since the moment we found her in the woods. As we loaded the last of our gear into the car and pulled out of the campsite, I turned my head for one final glance. And there she was, standing beside the ranger's station. Her shoulders were slouched, hair hanging limp, and her eyes, those hollow, distant eyes, looked like they were stuck somewhere else entirely. Not in the present. Not with us. I almost rolled the window down. Almost asked if she was okay. But I didn't. Something deeper than fear held me back, a gut-level instinct that I wasn't supposed to speak to her again. We rounded the bend, and she vanished behind the trees. I never learned her name. Never found out if she was truly lost, drunk, grieving, or something else entirely. But I'll never forget her voice. That whispered nonsense. The way she turned toward us in the dark. You hear all these stories around the campfire. Ghosts, monsters, killers. But the scariest thing I've ever seen was a real person. Alone. Mumbling to herself in the woods. And part of me still wonders if she was really alone. Our honeymoon was supposed to be all fresh air, redwoods, and campfire kisses. But what we found beneath those towering trees was silence so thick, it felt like the forest was hiding something. My wife and I got married in the spring, and for part of our honeymoon, we chose something a little off the beaten path, camping in Northern California, deep in the redwoods. Just us, a tent, and nature. No cell service. No distractions. A storm had torn through the area the day before, down branches, flood warnings, but we figured it was over. The upside? Fewer tourists. More solitude. We packed early and hit the road, spirits high. The drive north was gorgeous. Coastal cliffs, winding highways, fog rolling in like something out of a movie. We stopped in Eureka for snacks, water, and firewood, then drove into the park. The entrance was almost deserted. One ranger stepped out of a wooden booth, gave us a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes, and told us, "You two might have the whole area to yourselves." At the time, we grinned. Romantic, right? We took our permit, followed the twisting road into the forest, the redwoods swallowing our little car whole. It wasn't long before the pavement turned to gravel, then narrowed into a one-lane track hemmed in by trees. It felt like we were driving into a cathedral made of bark and silence. The site was a clearing just big enough for a tent and a picnic table. No one else in sight. My wife called it intimate. I tried to laugh, but there was a weight in the air. Not fear. Just an awareness. Like we weren't as alone as we thought. The first thing we noticed? No sounds. Not even birds. No rustling, no distant deer. It was like the forest had been hit with a mute button. We set up camp anyway. The sun was starting to drop, but we figured we had time to explore before dark. We followed the trail that brought us in, walking hand in hand through trees that looked older than time itself. The path was littered with storm debris, soaked branches, scattered pine needles, broken limbs. About a half-mile in, we found something unexpected, a cluster of rundown cabins. Gray wood, broken windows, collapsed roofs. Doors half-hinged and swinging gently in the wind. They looked abandoned, forgotten by the park system. We guessed they were once ranger outposts, or maybe old camping shelters. But something about them was wrong. No graffiti. No signs of recent trespassing. Just quiet decay. We didn't stay long. Back at camp, we tried to start a fire. Most of the kindling was soaked, but the fire log helped. The flames flickered weakly, casting long shadows between the trees. We made hot dogs, charred marshmallows, laughed over our sad cooking skills. Then the sun disappeared, and so did everything else. The darkness that fell over that forest wasn't normal. It was total. The moon didn't show. The stars barely pierced the redwood canopy. My wife leaned close, whispering, "Have you ever seen a sky so black?" We sat on the bench in silence, listening, waiting for some chirp or hoot to break the tension. But nothing came. Just the fire crackling. Our breath. After an hour, she touched my hand. "Can we go in the tent now?" That night in the redwoods, I learned something terrifying. Silence isn't always peaceful. Sometimes, it means you're being listened to. I agreed to call it a night. We doused the fire carefully, watching the last of the embers hiss and vanish into steam. Then we zipped ourselves into the tent and cocooned inside our sleeping bags. For a while, everything felt normal, warm, close, intimate. We whispered about the wedding, the long drive, the places we wanted to visit next. Then she froze. Her hand shot out, fingers pressed against my lips. My breath caught in my throat. I didn't ask what she heard, I just listened. At first, nothing. Just the gentle rustle of the canopy far above us. Then it came. Footsteps. Crunching through the wet leaves. Not fast, not panicked, measured. Pacing. Several sets, in different directions. As if we were being circled. My wife's eyes were wide. I mouthed animals? But even before I finished the thought, I heard it. Voices. Low. Muffled. Barely above a whisper. Not loud enough to make out words, just the cadence. The murmur of humans trying not to be heard. The steps grew closer. Too close. Something brushed against the tent wall. Just a soft drag. Like fingertips? Or maybe the back of a hand. We didn't move. We didn't breathe. Then, silence. Everything stopped at once. We lay there, locked in place by fear, for what felt like hours. But eventually we knew. We couldn't stay. I gave her the signal. Unzipped the flap just an inch. Peeked out. Nothing. No movement. No lights. Just the void between the redwoods. I nodded and we ran. Straight across the clearing into the car. I locked the doors as soon as she slammed hers shut. "Stay here," I whispered. I don't know what possessed me, but I climbed back out to grab our gear. I told myself it was just instinct, fight or flight, and I didn't want to leave anything behind. The night was cold and quiet. Too quiet. I grabbed the cooler, tossed it into the trunk. Then turned toward the tent. Snap! A twig, just off to the left. I didn't wait to see who, or what, was there. I ripped the tent stakes free, bundled the fabric, and hurled it into the back. I jumped into the driver's seat, heart racing, and peeled out down the gravel trail. But the road was different now. We reached a fork I didn't remember. Trees leaned in too close. My wife scanned desperately for any sign pointing us back toward the main road. Then we saw it. A small arrow sign, almost swallowed by ferns. It pointed right. We took it. As we sped through the winding road, just before reaching the main gate, I caught one last thing in the rearview mirror. A single headlamp. Not moving. Just watching from the trees. We didn't stop until we reached her parents' house 5 hours later. It was almost dawn. We collapsed onto the couch and never said a word about it. We haven't gone camping since. I thought going off the grid would help me find myself. But some places don't want to be found, and some silences aren't empty. My name is Henry Morgan. And 3 years ago, I hit a wall. I was unemployed. My parents were constantly on my back. Everything I did felt wrong. I needed space, somewhere far from judgment, far from my failures. So I chose Pisgah National Forest in North Carolina. Just me, a tent, and silence. The spot I picked wasn't part of the main campground. It was a secluded clearing I found online, somewhere off-trail, near a quiet creek. I drove out on a Wednesday, hoping to avoid weekend hikers. The road was narrow and rough. I parked at a pull-off, slung my old backpack over one shoulder, and hiked about 15 minutes down a muddy trail. The forest greeted me with a hush. Leaves still slick from recent rain. Trees swaying gently. I set up camp, but couldn't relax. The creek babbled nearby, a sound that usually calmed me, but that day, my thoughts wouldn't quiet. By dusk, the forest darkened faster than I expected. I had only a small flashlight, but it was enough to gather wet kindling and coax a small flame to life. I cooked hot dogs over the fire, barely tasting them. My mind was stuck in loops: money, future, failure. The night was calm. Too calm. And I couldn't sleep. I lay awake, flashlight clutched in my hand, just listening. Every crack. Every flutter. Every whisper between the trees. On my last night in the woods, someone circled my tent with a headlamp, and didn't want to be seen. The first night out there, I told myself it was just nerves, the stress of being alone in the forest, jobless, and uncertain about everything. The wind rustled the leaves overhead, the creek babbled nearby, and eventually, exhaustion gave way to sleep. But I still woke up at dawn, soaked in sweat. The feeling hadn't gone away. That tight pull in my gut, like I was still being watched, even with no one around. The next day, I walked a trail nearby. I didn't see a soul. A few birds chirped in the distance, and I caught a single glimpse of a deer that darted back into the trees. But overall, it felt like I was walking through a world emptied of life. Back at my site that afternoon, I noticed something strange. A footprint. Shallow, half covered by leaves, just at the edge of the clearing. I stared at it for a long time. My first instinct was to dismiss it, maybe it was mine. But when I compared it to the tread on my own boots, it didn't match. I tried to stay calm. Logical. This was public land. People passed through. But still, I hadn't heard or seen anyone else all day. That night, I made a bigger fire. The woods felt colder, the air heavier. My flashlight started to dim, so I reminded myself to change the batteries in the morning. I sat by the fire until I could barely keep my eyes open, then crawled into my tent. I don't know how long I slept before I woke again, heart racing, ears straining. Crunch. Leaves. Just 1 or 2 steps. Then silence. I didn't move. I gripped the edge of my sleeping bag like it was a lifeline. No more sounds. Nothing else happened. I eventually fell back asleep, though the fear never really left. The next morning, I thought about packing up early. But pride got the better of me. I told myself I'd stay one more night. Finish the trip. Not let fear win. I bought new batteries, filled my water, and even asked the cashier if anything strange had happened recently in the area. She just gave me a bored shrug and said it was always dead this time of year. That didn't help much. Back at camp, I tried to enjoy myself. Made a bigger dinner. Cleaned up. Read by lantern light. Anything to feel in control. Eventually, I zipped into my tent and told myself, one more night. That's it. Sometime past midnight the footsteps returned. But this time, they were closer. Heavier. Slower. More deliberate. My skin went cold. I sat up, slowly unzipped the tent just a crack, and that's when I saw it. A flash of light. Brief. Narrow. Like someone flicked on a headlamp, then instantly killed it. They were there. Watching. I didn't dare make a sound. The footsteps circled the camp. Once. Then again. Then they stopped, right by my car. I lay frozen, every sense screaming to act, but every instinct warning me not to move. Not yet. Eventually, the steps retreated, fading into the trees. I waited. Counted. 5 minutes. 10. Then I crawled out. My flashlight swept across the clearing. Nothing. But the forest felt different. Like it was holding its breath. I waited for dawn, then packed everything with shaking hands. When I approached the car, I saw them. Scuff marks. Right near the passenger door. Leading into the woods. Someone had been standing there. Watching me sleep. Maybe trying the handle. I didn't waste another second. I drove. Fast. In the rearview, the trees thinned slowly, but never stopped looming. Only when I reached the highway did I feel like I could breathe again. That's when it hit me. I came here to get away from my family, from feeling judged. But out here? Someone else was judging me. And they didn't want me to leave. I still wonder, if I'd stayed one more night, would I have made it out?